Slow aerial of Europe, muted cinematic tone. At the Munich Security Conference, leaders described a historic shift. The post-1945 world order, which shaped global politics for decades, was widely declared finished. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said, "The world order as it has stood for decades no longer exists." He warned that we are entering a period of great power politics and that freedom is no longer a given. French President Emmanuel Macron echoed this view. He said Europe's previous security structures tied to the old world order no longer exist, and that Europe must prepare for conflict. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio described the moment as a new geopolitical era because the old world is fading. Minimalist world timeline animation. In this framework, the world is entering stage 6 of the big cycle. A period marked by disorder, fewer rules, and direct competition between powerful nations. Stage 6 does not mean sudden collapse. It represents a transition, when power matters more than agreements and stability becomes harder to maintain. Historic borders shifting. Relationships between people and the systems that govern them operate similarly at internal and external levels. Historically, there were no clear distinctions between internal and external orders because national boundaries were not firmly defined. The six-stage cycle that explains internal order also applies between countries, with one crucial difference. International relations are driven far more by raw power dynamics. Icons, law, police, courts. Inside countries, order depends on laws, enforcement, courts, and consequences. Between countries, these mechanisms are weaker or ineffective. Attempts to impose rule-based external order, through institutions like the League of Nations or the United Nations, have struggled because they lack more wealth and power than the strongest nations. When individual countries possess more power than the collective, those countries determine outcomes. Power prevails. Wealth and influence are rarely surrendered voluntarily. Diplomacy footage. When powerful countries have disputes, they do not rely on judges or courts. They threaten one another, negotiate agreements, or escalate toward conflict. In this view, the international system often resembles the law of the jungle more than international law. Dark globe rotation. Most conflicts between countries fall into 5 major categories. Trade and economic wars. Technology wars. Capital wars. Geopolitical wars. Military wars. Trade wars involve tariffs, export restrictions, and economic pressure. Technology wars determine which innovations are shared and which are protected for national security. Geopolitical wars involve territory, alliances, and influence resolved through negotiation rather than fighting. Capital wars use financial tools, sanctions, asset freezes, and restrictions on credit and markets. Military wars involve direct deployment of armed forces. Most conflicts involve more than one category. Cyber warfare intersects across all 5. Escalation ladder graphic. The first 4 types often intensify over time until a military war begins. Once military conflict starts, all other dimensions become fully weaponized. Internal and external cycles tend to worsen together. When conditions decline, disputes multiply and the willingness to fight increases. All-out wars usually occur when existential issues cannot be resolved peacefully. The outcome determines which side sets the rules for the next international order. Historical patterns show recurring cycles of peace and conflict. Across centuries in Europe, long eras of stability were followed by periods of intense disorder. These cycles averaged roughly 150 years. Major wars were rarely sudden events, they were the culmination of tensions building over decades. Transition through Renaissance art, Enlightenment imagery, Industrial Revolution. Periods of prosperity such as the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and the Industrial Revolution created long expansions in wealth and stability. Yet these same upswings often planted the seeds for later conflict. The 30 Years' War. The Napoleonic Wars. And eventually, the 2 World Wars. Both the prosperous phases and the destructive phases reshaped the entire world. Not all countries prosper equally when leading powers rise. Some nations gain at the expense of others. China's decline from roughly 1840 to 1949, known as the Century of Humiliation, illustrates how powerful nations can exploit weaker ones during transitions between orders. Dark fade, slow pacing. 2 things about war are nearly certain. It rarely goes as planned. And it becomes far worse than imagined. Because of this, many principles in this framework focus on avoiding shooting wars whenever possible. Still, wars occur. Some are tragic mistakes. Others are fought because leaders believe the alternative, such as losing freedom, would be intolerable. The timeless forces that drive changes to the external order split screen: factories, military, cities. After survival and self-interest, the pursuit of wealth and power drives individuals, institutions, and nations. Wealth translates into power. It enables military strength, control over trade, and influence over rivals. Domestic strength and military strength operate together. A country must fund both guns, its defense, and butter, the living standards of its population. When a country fails to provide either security or prosperity, it becomes vulnerable to internal unrest and external threats. Ancient empire imagery slowly transitioning to modern superpowers. Studies of empires and dynasties suggest that financial strength, the ability to outspend rivals, is one of the most decisive advantages a nation can possess. This logic is used to explain how the United States prevailed over the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Spending power allowed strategic victory without a direct shooting war. Long-term success depends on maintaining prosperity and protection without creating excesses that eventually lead to decline. Some powers sustain dominance for centuries. None sustain it forever. Two rising lines converging on a graph. Conflict often emerges when a dominant power weakens or a rising power approaches parity. The greatest risk of military war occurs when two rivals possess comparable military strength and hold irreconcilable, existential differences. As written in this framework, one of the most dangerous flashpoints today is the relationship between the United States and China, particularly over Taiwan. Subtle Taiwan Strait map visualization. Leaders facing such conflicts confront painful choices. Fighting risks lives and resources. Backing down risks influence and credibility. When rivals possess the ability to destroy each other, trust becomes critical, yet extremely difficult to maintain. This dynamic resembles the prisoner's dilemma. Each side fears showing weakness first. Minimalist negotiation table silhouette. While international relations lack enforceable global rules, some strategies still produce better outcomes. Approaches that create win-win results tend to be more stable than those that create lose-lose outcomes. Achieving these outcomes requires understanding what matters most to both sides, and negotiating around those priorities. Skilled collaboration that expands and shares wealth and power can prevent destructive conflict. Winning, in this framework, means securing critical objectives without sacrificing what matters most. Wars that cost more in lives and resources than they provide in benefits are considered irrational, yet they occur frequently because escalation is difficult to stop. Escalation arrows rising slowly. Tit-for-tat escalation can spiral rapidly. Each side feels pressure to respond to avoid appearing weak. Misunderstandings grow when decisions must be made quickly. Emotional rhetoric and misinformation increase the danger of conflict. Truthful and thoughtful leadership reduces these risks, especially in democratic societies where public opinion shapes decisions. The movement between win-win relationships and lose-lose relationships tends to follow cycles. During prosperous periods, cooperation becomes more common. During difficult periods, conflict becomes more likely. When a dominant power begins to decline relative to a rising power, incentives diverge. The declining power seeks to preserve existing rules. The rising power seeks to change them to reflect new realities. Split screen, negotiation table versus battlefield silhouette. Power plays a decisive role in these transitions. Agreements and laws matter, but when pressure rises, power often determines outcomes. This leads to a central principle. Have power. Respect power. Use power wisely. Having power matters because it allows nations to enforce agreements and defend their interests when rules fail. Respecting power matters because fighting a war that cannot be won is strategically foolish. Negotiating the best possible settlement is often the wiser choice. Using power wisely does not always mean coercion or domination. In many cases, generosity, credibility, and trust produce more durable and profitable outcomes than intimidation. Soft diplomacy visuals. Soft power can achieve what hard power cannot. Collaboration can create win-win relationships that expand wealth and influence without destruction. Winning, in this framework, means obtaining what is most important while preserving what matters most. Wars that destroy more than they protect are considered irrational, yet history shows they happen repeatedly. Escalation ladder rising slowly. Stupid wars often begin through predictable mechanisms. The prisoner's dilemma. Tit-for-tat escalation. Fear of appearing weak. Misunderstandings during rapid decision-making. Rival powers frequently believe they must escalate because failing to respond appears dangerous. Each step upward makes de-escalation more difficult. This resembles a game of chicken. Push too far, and a collision becomes unavoidable. Media imagery fading into crowd reactions. Emotional rhetoric increases the danger. When leaders exaggerate threats or manipulate public opinion, escalation accelerates. Truthful, measured communication reduces risk, especially in democratic societies where public perception influences policy. Historic American Revolutionary War imagery. In conflict, perceptions of fairness often change. Tactics once considered unacceptable become justified if they lead to survival or victory. This reflects a harsh reality. Power reshapes rules during periods of existential conflict. Minimalist silhouette holding a concealed blade. Another principle emerges. Power is often best handled like a hidden knife. Keeping strength concealed can prevent rivals from feeling threatened and building counterpower. However, there are moments when displaying power or signaling willingness to use it can strengthen negotiation and prevent war. Understanding what an opponent values most, and what they will not fight for, helps create equilibrium. Negotiation becomes a process of trading priorities rather than forcing surrender. Graph showing rising versus declining power. Strategic timing matters. If relative power is declining, acting earlier may provide advantage. If relative power is rising, waiting may improve negotiating leverage. Decisions about whether to negotiate or fight depend on expectations about how power will evolve over time. Two arrows separating. When relationships become permanently lose-lose, separation may become necessary. In extreme cases, war becomes the final method of resolution. Yet maintaining excessive power also carries costs. Power requires time, resources, and responsibility. In some cases, less power brings greater stability and well-being. Slow fade to black. These principles set the stage for the most important modern case study, World War II, which demonstrates how internal cycles, economic pressures, and geopolitical rivalry converge into catastrophic conflict. Black and white footage fading in slowly. World War II provides the clearest modern example of how internal cycles, economic pressures, and geopolitical rivalry converge into catastrophic conflict. It illustrates how the money and credit cycle, the internal order cycle, and the external order cycle overlap to create the conditions for a new world order. The period leading into the 1930s began with a global depression following the 1929 crash. Economic collapse created intense internal conflict over wealth inside many nations. Populist, autocratic, nationalistic, and militaristic movements grew stronger. Political systems shifted left or right depending on each country's history and circumstances. In Germany, Japan, Italy, and Spain, severe economic distress and weaker democratic traditions led to extreme internal conflict and the rise of authoritarian leadership on the political right. In the Soviet Union and China, extreme hardship contributed to authoritarian leadership on the political left. The United States and the United Kingdom experienced political shifts as well, but stronger democratic traditions prevented the same level of transformation. Germany and Japan. Archival European street footage. Germany entered the 1930s burdened by reparation debts from World War I. Debt relief efforts had begun, but the global depression devastated the economy. Unemployment approached 25%. Bankruptcies spread. Poverty deepened. Political polarization intensified between communists on the left and fascists on the right. Adolf Hitler used a narrative of national humiliation tied to the Treaty of Versailles to mobilize support. He gained power in 1933 and consolidated control through emergency powers and authoritarian governance. Civil rights were restricted. Opposition was suppressed. Media and institutions were brought under state influence. At the same time, Germany pursued aggressive economic policies. Government spending expanded. Corporate investment increased. Infrastructure projects like the Autobahn were launched. Industrial production rose. Debt financed much of this growth, with banks and the central bank supporting government borrowing. Unemployment fell dramatically. Economic growth accelerated. Equity markets surged before the outbreak of war. Germany also rebuilt its military rapidly, directing economic resources toward expansion. Transition to Pacific maps. Japan experienced similar pressures. As an island nation dependent on exports and imported resources, Japan was severely impacted by the global depression. Exports collapsed. The country abandoned the gold standard. Currency depreciation reduced purchasing power. Economic hardship and inequality fueled political instability. Nationalist and militaristic movements grew stronger. Japan pursued expansion across Asia to secure resources, oil, iron, coal, and rubber, and to strengthen its strategic position. By the early 1930s, Japan had moved toward a top-down command economy supporting military growth and territorial expansion. The United States and the Allies' Great Depression footage, factories, breadlines. The Depression also affected the United States deeply. Bank failures reduced lending worldwide. Demand collapsed. Global trade shrank. The United States adopted protectionist policies to defend domestic industries, including the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. Tariffs protected certain sectors but weakened global economic efficiency and intensified international tensions. Other nations faced severe crises as well. The Soviet Union endured political purges and economic hardship. China struggled with civil conflict and famine. Environmental disasters like droughts worsened conditions in multiple regions. Deflationary depressions created debt crises that forced governments to print money, restructure debt, and expand spending. In the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt implemented massive fiscal programs, job initiatives, and social reforms. Government spending rose sharply. Tax rates increased. Economic growth rebounded temporarily. Yet tightening monetary policy in 1936 triggered another recession, reinforcing instability across major economies. Spanish Civil War imagery. Political conflict intensified across Europe. The Spanish Civil War reflected broader ideological battles between left and right. Economic hardship and wealth inequality drove redistributions of power. Some nations preserved democratic capitalism. Others moved toward authoritarian systems. Before shooting wars began, economic and technological conflicts escalated. For nearly a decade, countries engaged in trade disputes, capital restrictions, and geopolitical intimidation. Germany and Japan pursued expansion. Western powers hesitated to intervene directly. Economic warfare tools minimalist graphics, sanctions, embargoes, asset freezes. Economic and capital tools became weapons long before military conflict began. Asset freezes prevented rivals from accessing financial resources. Restrictions blocked access to capital markets. Embargoes and blockades cut off trade and strategic materials. These tactics intensified rivalry and pushed nations toward confrontation. The Hot War begins 1930s Europe map shifting borders. Germany pursued territorial expansion, annexing Austria and seizing parts of Czechoslovakia. European powers hesitated, hoping to avoid another catastrophic war. Wars rarely begin with certainty. Unknowns outweigh knowns. Leaders act when they believe backing down would mean unacceptable loss. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland. The war in Europe officially began. Germany rapidly captured territory across Europe, consolidating resources and strengthening alliances. At the same time, Japan expanded across Asia, pursuing strategic dominance. The United States initially remained cautious but increased economic pressure through sanctions and export controls. Lend-lease policies supported allied nations economically and militarily. Economic pressure on Japan escalated through asset freezes and oil embargoes. Facing resource shortages, Japan chose military action. In December 1941, attacks on Pearl Harbor and the Philippines brought the United States fully into the war. Slow fade, transition into wartime economy. The shift from economic war to shooting war transformed global systems. Governments imposed strict controls over production, prices, trade, and capital flows. Resources moved from profit-seeking toward survival. Factories shifting from civilian to military production. Once shooting wars begin, economic systems transform rapidly. Governments impose sweeping controls over production, prices, wages, and trade. Resources shift away from profit and toward survival. States determine what can be produced, what can be bought, and how much can be consumed. Rationing becomes common. Imports and exports are tightly controlled. Access to financial assets is restricted. Movement of money across borders becomes limited. Wars are expensive. Governments issue large amounts of debt, often financed by central banks. Credit systems weaken. International transactions rely more heavily on gold, silver, or barter. Political systems become more centralized as leaders gain emergency powers. Economic sanctions expand across both sides of the conflict. Stock market closure graphic. Financial markets behave differently during wartime. Stock markets may close entirely. Investors lose access to capital. Currency trust declines between rival nations. Prices and capital flows become controlled, making it difficult to determine real market values. Market performance increasingly reflects military outcomes rather than economic fundamentals. German equities rose early in the war as territorial gains increased perceived strength. Later, Allied victories shifted expectations and market momentum. After major turning points such as the Battle of Midway, Allied markets strengthened while Axis markets weakened. When the war ended, markets in defeated nations were closed for years and much of their wealth was wiped out. US markets emerged stronger within the new global order. Gold bars slowly illuminated. Protecting wealth during war becomes extremely difficult. Traditional investments lose reliability. Capital mobility disappears. High taxes and forced redistribution shift resources toward survival efforts. Debt and currency lose value as governments borrow and print money to finance conflict. Gold becomes a trusted store of value because credit systems become uncertain. Dark globe slowly rotating into sunrise. The conclusion returns to the larger cycle. Every dominant power experiences a rise, a peak, and eventually a decline. Some declines occur gradually and peacefully. Others lead to periods of severe disorder and conflict. Transitions between world orders are shaped by how nations manage wealth, power, and internal stability. Countries that remain productive, maintain fiscal balance, and pursue cooperative relationships can soften the impact of decline. Those that fail to adapt risk entering destructive phases of the cycle. No empire lasts forever. But the path through decline is not predetermined. Wise use of power, disciplined economic policy, and win-win relationships can reduce the damage that accompanies transitions between eras. Wide shot of Earth from space. Slow fade. Power shapes outcomes. But how power is used determines whether the next world order emerges through cooperation or through conflict.